Hello, and welcome to Season 63 of House of Reinforcement. Let's meet this season's schedules.
Hi, it's Mike with BehavioralComedy, and today we're going to be talking about schedules of reinforcement. Just to get a few terms out there, if I mention a V, it means variable. If I say F, that means fixed. If I say I, that means interval. And if I say R, that means ratio. Today we're going to be going over the simple schedules of reinforcement, not to be confused with complex schedules of reinforcement. Complex schedules of reinforcement are just taking two or more simple schedules, putting them together, and coming up with a new complex schedule. One schedule that we're not going to talk about today are fixed time schedules and variable time schedules. So a brief intro to that. A fixed time schedule is going to be something like a TV in jail. You don't have to do anything. No behavior has to occur. You just have to be in the presence of the TV at a fixed time every day. You get to watch TV. A variable time is going to be something like your phone rings. You don't have to do anything for the phone to ring, and it happens at random times. You're not really sure. And so both of those schedules are response-independent schedules of reinforcement. So you can think of something like an NCR,
non-contingent reinforcer,
or reinforcement schedule, where no behavior has to occur. It just happens on some time schedule. So today, we're going to be talking about the 4 simple schedules of reinforcement. And one thing, too, I want to point out, when you see the classic graphs and what the schedules look like, those are always depicted on a cumulative record. Not to be confused with the cumulative graph, which we can make in Excel, but a cumulative record where it has that little fan on the record itself that shows you responses over time. So with the record, you can see every moment that organism is responding, or those behaviors are being measured. You can see every moment and know what point in time things happen, when reinforcement occurred, when behavior occurred, when there were pauses, all of that such. So I just wanted to point out, when we see the classic schedules, they're on cumulative records. If we re-put those onto an Excel graph, either an equal intervals Excel graph or a cumulative graph ourselves, they're not going to look the same because of our charting conventions. So with that said, let's jump right into it and learn about our schedules. Hey, it's your man FR here. I like to play hard, and I like to pause hard. I like to rise, and I like to run. And if you catch me in the middle of one of my post-reinforcement pauses, woo! You better watch out. I'm going to win because I'm fixed on my goals. With fixed ratio schedules of reinforcement, or FR schedules of reinforcement, there is a fixed amount of responses required before reinforcement will be administered following that last required behavior. So it's fixed in that the number doesn't change every time. If it's an FR5, it takes 5 responses before reinforcement will occur. If it's FR200, it requires 200 responses before reinforcement will be consequated with the last response. With an FR200, it'll be over 200 reinforcement, 200 reinforcement, and that schedule continues. Continuous reinforcement is really just FR1, meaning after every one response, reinforcement will occur for that behavior. FR2 just means every other response. And so the responses that are critical here, the responses that we're talking about, they're our target behavior. It's not going to be just any behavior. If we're working on math problems, it's going to be correctly answering the math problem. So if an FR5 correctly answers math problems, you'd have to wait first, second, after the 5th correct math problem, which may be the 100th math problem completed, but only after the 5th correct math problem will reinforcement be delivered. When looking at a cumulative record of any FR schedule of reinforcement, what we're going to see is a rise and then a run, followed by a rise and a run. Those runs are going to follow reinforcement. So on a cumulative record, you'll see a little tick mark there, and it looks like a little slash over the responding behavior, and that just indicates that reinforcement was administered. An FR schedule, what you're going to see is what we call a post-reinforcement pause. And all that means is that after reinforcement is given, there are no behaviors, or at least no targeted behaviors, occur for some period of time. After that run is over, after that post-reinforcement pause is over, then you will get rapid responding again under your FR schedule until reinforcement is delivered, and then there will be another post-reinforcement pause. When looking at this on the cumulative record, you will kind of notice it looks like steps, with the flat part of the step where you would put your foot being a post-reinforcement pause, and the steep going up are going to be our cumulative number of responses as they go. Remember, with our cumulative record, our y-axis is going to be the cumulative number of responses, and our x-axis is going to be time. We have our fan fold here so we can see how far or how long post-reinforcement pauses are due to the ability to read how far in time
based off the x-axis.
So it gives you a lot of information, and you can really see what happens during a session or during the experiment, during whatever. So why do we have post-reinforcement pauses? Not 100% sure. Some believed that there was time needed to eat. Some believed other things. What makes the most sense to me is that under an FR schedule of reinforcement, following reinforcement, more reinforcement has never occurred. But responding quickly with the short IRT, reinforcement has occurred. So FR5, you click the lever, you engage in the target behavior 5 times, reinforcement occurs. You then go right back at it, reinforcement doesn't occur. Only after those 5 responses has reinforcement occurred. So we don't have back-to-back reinforcements. And that just is the best explanation that I've ever heard for why there's post-reinforcement pauses, because getting back at it has never resulted in reinforcement. After some time passes, i.e. our post-reinforcement pause, the organism whose behaviors are being measured has had more deprivation or time to be deprived from whatever said reinforcer is. Boom, higher rates of responding. Boom, reinforcement. Boom, post-reinforcement pause. And that schedule just continues to go and go and go. You'll see longer rises, longer runs, depending on your schedule of reinforcement. And again, don't forget, FR1 is continuous reinforcement. So you're going to see quick little steps and rises, steps and rises.
Namaste. Hi. My formal name is Fixed Interval. My parents call me FI. I would like it if you would call me Phi. I don't understand what the big deal is. Can't we all just work together and respond when the time is right, the way nature intended? I mean, don't get me wrong. I do my work when it's time. Why am I going to win this season? I didn't know this was a competition. Are you sure it's the best time?
A fixed interval, or an FI schedule of reinforcement, works similarly to an FR schedule, whereas that whatever we require for reinforcement to be administered is fixed. With an interval, instead of being responses, it's going to be amount of time. The first response after that time has elapsed will result in reinforcement. So what we have here, an FI 1 minute, means after reinforcement, we will wait 1 minute. After that 1 minute has elapsed, the next behavior will be consequated with reinforcement. So we might have an FI of 1 minute, and after that 1 minute elapses, the organism does not respond for 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, a behavior occurs, boom, reinforcement. So on this, it's the first response after the time. All behaviors during the time are not consequated. They are measured when we look at the cumulative record, but you'll never see a tick mark in there because reinforcement does not occur. It only occurs, again, after that first response after the interval has lapsed. When looking at an FI schedule of reinforcement on a cumulative record, what you're going to see here is a scallop forming pattern, where as time goes, there's going to be a post-reinforcement pause, and then there's going to be high responding prior to reinforcement occurring. That is, prior to the interval elapsing. So you get no behavior, no behavior, no behavior, high rates of behavior, followed by reinforcement, and then another post-reinforcement pause, just like we would see in the FR schedule. When behavior is likely to happen again is when it gets close to that interval elapsing. So what we have here, again, a post-reinforcement pause. After reinforcement is delivered, reinforcement has not occurred again. It's only after some time has elapsed, reinforcement has occurred again. A matching law is a great way to describe how behaviors will be allocated under certain environmental conditions. Thinking about matching law, to maximize reinforcement and minimizing response effort, responding as close as you can to the temporal locus of reinforcement is the way to maximize reinforcement. So if it's at the end of every 10 minutes, you would see high rates of behaviors occurring right before that interval elapse. The only real life application or example that I have was when my grandma was in the hospital. She was very sick. It was towards the end of her time, and she had a morphine drip that she could control by clicking a button, and it was set on a 10-minute fixed interval schedule. And we were sitting in the hospital room, and you used to click, 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 click. And we all kind of looked around, not really sure what the click was. My grandma couldn't even tell you what the click was. She was the one making the clicks. And it was her just pushing the button over and over again to get morphine. So it happened again, and it seemed to be very rhythmic, happening on some kind of fixed schedule. So my dad was just set a timer, and he goes, the next time we hear the clicks, I'll stop my timer. And then over this, we found out about every 10 minutes, we would hear the clicks. And it was looking, and eventually we put it together and found out it was my grandma. When it got close to that 10 minutes, without her knowing it's 10 minutes or anything of that, the automaticity of reinforcement, boom, kicked in. And click, 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 click. My dad goes, Ma, you're the one that's making the clicks. Oh, I guess it is me. She was not aware, could not tact that she was making those clicking. But if you put her responding behavior of clicking the morphine administer, you would see that it looks like a scallop. She would get the morphine, you'd hear it, and then she wouldn't do anything for a little while. She would not engage in that clicking behavior. When it started getting close to the end of the 10 minutes, click, 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 click. As soon as the 10 minutes expired, the first click, boom, reinforcement, and then it would go, and then that cycle just continued until eventually we tried to alleviate the amount of strain and things like that on my grandma. So we just set a 10-minute timer, and every 10 minutes we'd say, hey, morphine's available, click, it's over. So that's FI schedules and the best real-world example I can describe. Hey, what's up? VI here. I'm the little cousin of VR, and I gotta say, I'm tired of living in their shadows. We grew up in the same neighborhood, on the same street, on the same cumulative record. And people don't even know what I can do. Under the right environmental conditions, I'm faster than VR, but they get all the glory, all the fame. And I'm tired of it. Why am I going to win? Because it's my time to shine. Variable interval schedules of reinforcement, or VI schedules of reinforcement, works similar to FI schedules of reinforcement in that an amount of time must elapse before the next behavior will consequate in reinforcement. The big difference here is that the time varies from trial to trial. It's not fixed as with an FI. So what happens here, anywhere between a millisecond and 1,000 years from now, behaviors after that interval can be consequated with reinforcement. The way you deem it is you call it let's say we had a VI 1 minute. That means you take all the times from a millisecond to the maximum amount of time that can occur in your trials, and the average is 1 minute. The important thing here to remember is that you can't just go anywhere between 30 seconds and a minute and a half and call the average a minute. The power in a variable schedule is that in any moment during the schedule, a behavior may be consequated with reinforcement. So just because reinforcement occurred, reinforcement may occur again immediately following the next behavior. And that may happen an infinite amount of times in a row. It really doesn't matter. Only thing that matters is when at the end of it, when you take all of those times in between behaviors, all of the interval requirements, average them, it comes out to 1 minute. That would be a VI 1 minute. The great thing about this is you will not get post-reinforcement pauses because this time under variable schedules, responding again has resulted in reinforcement. So you might respond for 2 minutes. Next behavior, consequated with reinforcement. Next behavior, consequated with reinforcement. We had a 0.1 millisecond interval. 0.1 seconds elapses, reinforcement occurs. 0.1 second elapses, reinforcement occurs. 3 minutes elapse, reinforcement occurs. So the organism is not, well, better way to say that, the reinforcement is always reinforced at random times. It is not clear when the next one's going to come. And so in this way, you get high rates of responding with no reinforcement pauses. On a cumulative record, a VI schedule is going to look like a straight line sloping upward with moderate to high rates of behavior, depending on the reinforcement schedule. When you're looking for the tick marks on here, they kind of seem to come in random times because they vary. That's what a variable interval schedule does. So reinforcement may occur after 30 seconds, after a minute, after a millisecond, after another millisecond, after 3 minutes, after 2 minutes, after a millisecond, after 4 minutes. And then you take that average, and that's what you call your VI schedule, a VI minute and a half, whatever you come up with. And so in this way, continuing to respond is the way to maximize reinforcement. And the thing to remember, though, it's still an interval schedule of reinforcement. So the responses during that time are not measured. Well, on a cumulative record, they'll be measured. But in practice, if you're in the field, if you're using and implementing a VI schedule, those other behaviors don't matter. It's only the first correct response after the time elapses. Whoa, dude. Whoa. All right. Hey, what up? It's the Big V here. The VR. The Raish. The schedule to be. Well, I'm more concerned about my rise than I am my run. When I work hard, I work hard. When I play hard, I play hard. And when you ain't catching me on the field celebrating at a ×4, you can find me at home working on my slope or at the casino winning big. Why am I gonna win this season? Ha ha ha! Because I will prevail against any variable. The last simple schedule of reinforcement we're going to discuss is variable ratio, or a VR schedule of reinforcement. We've already went over what variable means, and we've already went over what ratio means. Putting those two together describes this schedule of reinforcement. So it's variable, meaning the requirement is going to change from time to time, with the name of the schedule being the average of the requirement. What is required? A ratio, or a certain number of responses are required before reinforcement is administered. From my personal learning history, this is the most used schedule of reinforcement in the field. And a lot of that is from following rules that it's the most powerful. It's been demonstrated that under the right conditions, you can get very high rates of consistent responding using a variable schedule of reinforcement. On the cumulative record, a VR schedule looks very similar to a VI schedule. In fact, you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference by simply looking at the slope or the design of the graph. The other schedules, fixed ratio and fixed interval, are very easy based on their design. To recap, an FR schedule looks like stairs. There's rises and runs. An FI schedule looks like scallops as they kind of go up. They both have post-reinforcement pauses, and this accounts for their shape on a cumulative record. A very powerful thing of variable schedules of reinforcement: there are no post-reinforcement pauses. So as the VI just look like a steady slope going up, so is the VR. And you're going to see again random spots where reinforcement occurred. And it might be response 10, and then response 11, and then response 20, and then 21, and then 22, and then 23, and then 50, and then 60, and then 62. And the reason you don't get post-reinforcement pauses is because on the variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, the next behavior may consequate with reinforcement. The best example is a slot machine. You probably heard it many, many times. Every time you pull that lever, you might win money. Just because you won money doesn't mean that the next time you may not win money. If a slot machine was on a fixed ratio of reinforcement, every time you pulled that slot machine
And win?
you would leave knowing that the next pull will not result in reinforcement, because in the past, it never has. So there's nothing to indicate in your learning history that the next one will. With the VR schedule of reinforcement, the next one may be consequated with reinforcement. So you keep going, you keep pulling the lever, keep pulling the lever, keep pulling the lever, and what you get is high rates and consistent reinforcement value over time. And so it's going to look like a straight line on the cumulative record. Very powerful, very good. All of the simple schedules of reinforcement have a time and a place that they should be utilized. VR, in my personal experience, is what practitioners try to use the most. The problem I've seen with VR schedules is that they're not true VR schedules. I've had someone describe to me, well, I reinforce the 7th to the 14th response with the average being this. So that means response number 1 through 6 have never been consequated with reinforcement, and you're going to get a post-reinforcement pause. People will then say, this is a VR 12, 13, whatever, 7, 10, 11, whatever the math is. People say, this is a VR 11. No, really, it's an FR 7 to 14, with it varying between 7 to 14. The whole reason to use a variable schedule of reinforcement is to eliminate the post-reinforcement pauses, maximizing session time, maximizing responses. If you don't have back-to-back reinforcement, then it is going to result in a post-reinforcement pause, and you might as well just be in control of it. If it's too difficult to implement a variable schedule of reinforcement, just use the fixed schedule of reinforcement and be aware that there's going to be post-reinforcement pauses. Let's say you reinforce every 10th correct math problem. Just know, after reinforcement, math problem behavior is not going to happen, and that's okay. It's due to the nature of your reinforcement schedule and nothing else. It's not a lack of motivation. It's not anything that the student or the learner is doing. It's simply based on the schedule of reinforcement that you're using. Remember, the learner's always right. So when the learner is not doing something that you anticipated, that means you're not implementing what needs to be done to occasion the behavior you're looking for. So in the field, when I use a variable schedule of reinforcement, if I'm going to use an interval, I had an app, and you could set it the average time, and it would kind of vibrate in your pocket, and it'd either vibrate after 1 second, that was a minimum, or it would do the average, whatever number we have to do to get to the average. That app did not get updated, so I no longer have that app, and using variable intervals of schedules of reinforcement is not possible at my time. I do not have the technology, I do not have the tools to use a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. The ease of it is very easy, especially when you're having to train other individuals, such as caregivers, RBTs, other people, other BCBAs on your team, anyone that's not you. Because the ease of it is just the first correct, after this vibrates, the next correct response, provide a reinforcement. Very easy. You're not tracking every single response. You don't have to be like, was that correct? Was that incorrect? Was that incorrect? Was that correct? Was that correct? Was that incorrect? No, you just wait. Bzz, bzz. Next correct one, Skittles. Bzz, bzz. Next correct one, Skittles. Very easy to implement. Fixed interval schedules of reinforcement, I would not use in the field unless there is a really compelling reason to use them. You don't want that post-reinforcement pause. It'd be much easier to implement. You can just set a timer. My phone's built-in timer has that ability where you can set a reoccurring 2-minute time interval. After 2 minutes, bzz, bzz, next response, reinforcement. After 2 minutes, bzz, bzz, next response, reinforcement. This is not going to result in a lot of math problems being completed. So probably wouldn't use it. Not saying there's not a time and place for it, just most likely wouldn't use it. Fixed ratio, very easy to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, reinforcement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, reinforcement. The problem there, it's a little more response effort on the practitioner's end. You have to, every single response that we're looking at, every math problem, was it correct? Yes or no? After 5 correct on an FR5, after that 5th one, you provide a reinforcement immediately following that response. So you have to be anticipating, you have to be able to judge in a moment whether that was right or that was wrong as far as the answer goes, and then consequate it with reinforcement as soon as you can, as soon as that behavior is finished. And that way you'll get that. And then just know post-reinforcement pause is going to follow, which is okay. It's in the nature of the schedule. A VR schedule, probably the most difficult to implement. Because not only is it random, do you have to randomly know when to respond, you have to track every single response in between reinforcement periods and then be able to come up with the random number of correct responses that equate in reinforcement. Time and time again, it is very difficult to train someone to respond. All right, we're doing VR7. To respond, there's one response, reinforcement. One response, reinforcement. One response, reinforcement. I've had people, I'm not providing reinforcement after this one. That's the randomness of the schedule. There is no discriminating factors. There's no environmental cues that allows the learner to take advantage of the schedule. The only way to maximize reinforcement is to behave. So our learners will keep behaving if the schedule is implemented correctly. And eventually you can thin out the schedule, get to a VR20, but you still sometimes have to reinforce back-to-back responses. Humans are not very good at coming up with random numbers, random sequential orders, and how do you even know if it's going to equate to a VR7? Well, what I do is I use a randomizer app, downloaded one for free, and then I do the math, and I'll write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. Come up with, that's VR. Oh, you add those up, divide them by that number. The mean is 3.75. And then I'll have a VR 3.75. I've had people come in like, don't you mean the VR 3 or VR 4? No, the math says it's a VR 3.75. Just making that number up, but I would come up with it, do the math. And I've actually went to an expel. I had philosophical doubt. Always should have philosophical doubt. So what I did is I took like 20 of those numbers, I had that lined up with the randomizer, and I hit randomize, number 1, write down number 1, randomize, number 6, 6. Did that 20 times, I took the average, and it did come out to about the average I was looking for. The more trials that I put in there, the closer and closer to the average it'll be with the randomizer. So, and you're not looking at, if you just do 2 responses on a VR schedule, it's not really a VR schedule. You're not really going to get an average of anything. You just add those 2, divide it by 2, and that'd be your VR. But it's over time. If you stick with the VR schedule over time throughout multiple sessions, it'll average 7 responses. But sometimes you'll hit that randomizer. It'll say 1. The next response, the next correct response results in reinforcement. Hit the randomizer. 1. The next response results in reinforcement. 7. The 7th correct response results in reinforcement. And in that way, you don't have to pick the number. You keep doing it. I believe the White Book, at least the 2nd edition, if I remember correctly, they suggested getting like note cards and writing them all on note cards, and then you shuffle them. And if you went through every note card, it's going to average, it's going to be a VR 6. And then so you take the note cards, you've done all note cards, you then shuffle them again. Implement it again, and it's going to be random ordering. You just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the amount is. The biggest problem, you gotta have number 1 in there, you gotta have number 2 in there, you gotta have number 3 in there. I don't know if it's in the book, but I would love to know. Will we have post-reinforcement pauses? Maybe this is a thesis idea. What about if we only reinforce the 1st, 2nd, 3rd responses, and then started at 10 again? So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 have never consequated with reinforcement. And then everything else, put it on a traditional VR schedule. Will we see, following reinforcement, no post-reinforcement pause? But we'll see a post-reinforcement pause following the 3rd response, because the 4th to 9th response has never in the past been consequated with reinforcement? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know from the current literature, the current research, it's just got to be every single one. And in that way, if reinforcement could be available at any time from your learner's perspective, you're not going to get post-reinforcement pauses, because that is not how to maximize reinforcement while minimizing response effort. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it made sense. If you got questions, comments, additional feedback, you want something else explained, if that didn't really make sense to you, let me know. Please just comment, like, hit all the buttons. You can email me at BehavioralComedy@gmail.com. And stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.